Hey everybody, KC here. So this is the kind of story that really makes my blood boil. From the New York Times. The Federal Trade Commission said that it found that several social media and streaming services engaged in, quote, vast surveillance, unquote, of consumers, including minors, collecting and sharing more personal information than most users realized. The findings come from a study of how 9 companies, including Meta, YouTube, and TikTok, collected and used consumer data. The sites, which mostly offer free services, profited off the data by feeding it into advertising that targets specific users by demographics, according to the report. The companies also failed to protect users, especially children and teens. The FTC said that it began its study nearly 4 years ago to offer the first holistic look into the opaque business practices of some of the biggest online platforms that have created multi-billion-dollar ad businesses using consumer data. The agency said that the report showed the need for federal privacy legislation and restrictions on how companies collect and use data. To which I would respond, damn right it does. Absolutely. The Times goes on to point out that tech giants have been under intense scrutiny for abuses of privacy and have in recent years been blamed in part for contributing to the mental health crisis among young people and children that has been linked by some social scientists and the Surgeon General to the rampant use of social media and smartphones. But despite multiple proposals in Congress for stricter privacy and children's online safety protections, nearly all legislative attempts at regulating big tech have failed. You know, it's the old saw, right? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And there's a part of me, listen, years ago, I used to argue against this sort of stuff. Listen, social media, e-commerce, they were young businesses, and I thought they needed lots of runway in order to mature and grow. You know something? They've had enough runway. There's a thing called Section 230, which you're probably familiar with, which is part of the Communications Decency Act, which is ironic, that protects online platforms from legal challenges. Well, it's time to end those protections, or at the very least, modify them severely so these companies can be held accountable. I'm in favor of things like age gating. You should not be able to go on a social media site until you're 16 years old. If you can't drive, you can't go on social media. That seems entirely reasonable to me. And by the way, retailers ought to pay attention to the advertising component of this. If you are using your retail media networks to collect data about people, especially young people, and then you're just feeding that to advertisers and making a buck on it, well, as far as I'm concerned, it seems entirely appropriate that you should be held accountable for that. I think that the same kinds of scrutiny that is going to be seen by the social media companies also ought to be applied to retailers that are collecting data and using it improperly, certainly without people's permission, and certainly when it applies to people under a certain age. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this morning. And as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.